All right. Good morning. Good Friday, everyone. Welcome to today's American Community Media Weekly National Briefing. I'm Pilar Marrero, your moderator for today and co-producer of our weekly Friday briefings with my colleague Sunita Sorachi. Today, we will go behind the resurging crypto craze and we'll talk about huge profits, risks, and scams. Since Bitcoin's launch in 2009, cryptocurrencies have been hailed as a new frontier for building wealth and exchanging value outside the traditional financial system. Supporters argue that crypto can empower individuals, particularly in minority communities that have been, I'm sorry, okay, that have long been underserved by banks by offering new paths to financial inclusion and economic agency. Some advocates even see it as a tool to challenge and reform the entrenched US financial structure. But critics warn of serious pitfalls, extreme volatility, lack of oversight, and a pattern of targeting vulnerable populations with high-risk promises. Add to that an uptick in scams, environmental concerns over energy use, and ethically murky endorsements, even from members of the first family, and the picture becomes far more complicated. Our panel will unpack the hype, the hope, and the hazards of crypto with expert insight. Our distinguished speakers include Tyron Ross, CEO and co-founder of Turnkey Labs and principal at 401 Financial. Control Dumas, Director of Derivatives Policy, Better Markets. Elizabeth Kuo, Managing Director of FTI Consulting. And Sig Fox, investigative reporter at Bloomberg News and author of the book Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. We ask reporters to enter questions in the chat. We will then proceed to Q&A immediately after each speaker presents, and then at the end, as you know, we'll have more questions. Later this afternoon, we will send the video along with expanded bios. All right, let's go on. Our first speaker is Tyron Ross. He will cover the basics of cryptocurrency and explain why he's such an enthusiast. Welcome, Mr. Ross.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. This is something that I've been a part of for 13 years now. And my hope is coming out of this that there's a greater understanding. I do think we are still lacking on the education side when it comes to crypto assets. And for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to use crypto assets. I think the original sin of crypto is that they were called cryptocurrencies. And I think that's where the confusion for a lot of people begins. So let me start with why I'm so passionate about it. I grew up in a home that did not have a bank account. I grew up in a home that lacked access to knowledge and financial education. And I saw my parents operate outside of the traditional financial system, whether that was with check cashing places or money orders or things of that sort. So when I was introduced to Bitcoin, I couldn't really unsee the opportunity. And that was exacerbated by the fact that I was working on Wall Street at the time. So here I am, first in my family to finish high school, let alone go to college. I have a job on Wall Street, which is the epicenter of financial services, but yet I was front and center with what it meant to be outside of the traditional financial system and what it meant to go through this labyrinth of services in order to be banked, in order to stay banked. So when I was introduced to Bitcoin and a friend sent it to me, I immediately had a lot of questions, and I was a skeptic like everyone else. So there's this mythical man who created these 21 million coins, and I'm supposed to believe that, right? Exactly, right? And I grew up in a Pentecostal home, so Jesus was enough. We didn't need anyone else to add to that. So long story less long, like all people at first, I was a skeptic. He sent me some to my phone. I got it immediately, and I was like, okay, tell me everything. So I want to stop to say this. There's a lot of ways in which cryptocurrency, crypto assets, Bitcoin, all of these things could be explained, but I want to use an example that I think is really important to understand. So if I was walking down the street and I saw a Pilar and I walked up to her and I handed her a dollar, a US dollar, and I walked away, That's all that crypto is and does. She doesn't need to know my name. I don't need to know hers. We don't need a social security number. I don't need a bank. We don't need to exchange any words, anything like that. The only thing that needs to be known is that she opens that dollar and sees that it is a dollar. And I know that I was handing her a dollar. Now, here's what's really cool about that. Don't need a bank. I can hand her that dollar at any time in the morning, at night, on holidays. I can do that on the weekends. And she's still able to identify that value and use that value. That is no more, no less than what happens with blockchains or crypto as we know it. It's the ability to send value anywhere in the world at any time to anyone without the approval or lack thereof of a third party, a bank. And I think that's where the fundamental understanding comes in here. Also, to lend to the education of why I'm here is this. There is a great inequity when it comes to financial markets. There's 1.4 billion people globally who are considered unbanked. There's 5 million of those folks here in the United States of America. There's 12 million people who would be considered living in a banking desert. Yes, there are banking deserts in the United States of America, which means that there are people that are not within 10 miles of a bank. Not to mention that it actually is very expensive to be poor in this country and or have a bank or checking account. Some fees could go as high as $35 a month for a bank account. Yes, there's free options, but still those options are free if you have the privileges of a direct deposit, which folks don't have, a certain balance inside of that account, which most folks don't have. So what Bitcoin and crypto ultimately does is it acts like this really big flashlight on the existing inequities that exist in the current financial markets and infrastructure, not only in the United States, but the world. I want to end on this point. There's something that was introduced here in the United States recently that other parts of the world have had since the 1970s, and that is real-time payments. The United States of America got a real-time payment system called FedNow in 2023. Japan had it since 1973. Add to the fact that FedNow was originally introduced in 2020. Took 3 years to be launched, but was introduced in 2020. There is no one on God's green earth that can convince me that that was not because in 2009, this wonky, weird cypherpunk technology was introduced to the world, that everyone was wondering what was happening here, that allowed people to send money and value in real time. I cannot be convinced that Bitcoin had nothing to do with that. So whether you believe it's an investment or something to be held, speculative, volatile, risky, which other folks, a lot more smarter than myself, will get into later, the reason why I'm so passionate about it and why I've been in the space this long and building a company around it and have a financial firm that gives advice on it is this reason. What it does is it challenges the existing system and ushers in new ways for folks to get access, which is the main thing. Everyone deserves access to financial services independent of color, race, creed, job, denomination, zip code, location. Everyone should have access to banking, the ability to do that banking whenever you see fit. One, in self-sovereignty, to have control over when and how you move your funds. So just to put the ribbon on that, what you're seeing now with this administration here in the United States, and I think what you're seeing globally, is the recognition that cryptocurrencies, crypto assets, Bitcoin, blockchain, all of these buzzwords are not going away. And folks are using it for different purposes, but more importantly, the reason why this is going to make a change in the way financial services, the way wealth management, the way banking, the way remittances are done, which I didn't even get into as well, is the ease of use and the ability for people to access this, whether it's on a phone or anywhere in the world in real time. And the ability to get services, especially access to funds in real time matters. Because if I am facing eviction or I need to pay my rent or have food today, Friday, and I get paid today, my money should not clear in my bank account on Monday. And God forbid it is a holiday and I get that money on Tuesday. That means I'm getting evicted today and my things are outside on the road on a Saturday. So that's what this is about. It's about breaking the current infrastructure, making it more accessible, making it free. And there are certain silos of that, which other folks will get into of, okay, well, maybe I can have this as an investment. Maybe it's something that just allows me to transact and send value cheaper or faster. Or maybe it's just something that exists to make it more equitable for people to access financial services all across the world. And I think that's something to be very excited and passionate about.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a great presentation, very easy to follow. Okay, Sunita, why don't you ask your question about the remittances? I'm not sure if he will be able to answer, but maybe he will.
Yeah, Mr. Ross, you had just mentioned remittances as a means, using Bitcoin as a means for sending dollars back home to the home country, remittances. Do you see folks using Bitcoin as a means to get around the proposed 3.5% tax on remittances?
Yes, I mean, you look at last year, $13 billion in remittances, right? Like, I think folks would rather have had that money made available to family members overseas. So that is a really good point. So yes, I think one, we have to understand that crypto and Bitcoin itself is a global asset class. There's more usage. The more you get away from America, the more you see usage here because we have a bunch of options to pay. And that's the thing. In the United States of America, it's a horrible currency because every time you spend it, it's taxable, right? So whether it's a currency or not depends on where your feet are, right? So I'll give you a real life example. My dad is from Guyana, South America, right? We would always send money back and forth. And I was explaining to them, hey, there's an actual platform where we can actually send him value, right? Whichever value we decide, Bitcoin, and it will convert it to the local currency right there in real time. So yes, I think whether it's Bitcoin now, whether it's stable coins, which are just crypto dollars, right? They're just dollars on the internet, right? It allows you to send that money faster and cheaper, and then you start to remove those fees. So yes, it is a viable option. And again, as you start to leave the US, you see a lot of people using Bitcoin for that purpose.
I'm going to ask you one more question, but I want a quick answer because we need to move on in 2 minutes. You mentioned FedNow. How accessible is that system today to the people who need it the most, like those without bank accounts?
So unfortunately, if you don't have a bank account, again, that's the first step. So if you don't have a bank account, you can't benefit from it. But it was the first process to actually get people more access to banking. Here's why, right? Most people on here in the United States probably know of Zelle right now, and most folks usually Zelle. And what you've seen is real-time payment system is introduced, but lowly adopted. You want to know why? Because it's competition to the existing system, which means you then have to make it accessible to everyone, and you're bringing more people in. So again, great point. But that was why it took so long to be introduced. And now that it is introduced, the adoption has been low because again, that means money now, the minute I deposit it, I get it. And again, I think there'll be some changes here with that soon, hopefully.
Mr. Ross, please stay around and feel free to make comments in the chat or, raise your hand even if you want to, but please stay for more questions later on. Thank you so much. Let's move on now. All right, let's move on now to our second speaker, Cantrell Dumas from Better Markets. He has a different take on whether the hype needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Mr. Dumas?
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to contribute to this important conversation. My name is Kentrell Dumas, and I serve as Director of Derivatives Policy at Better Markets. Today, I'll provide a brief overview of a fact sheet we published on the intersection between cryptocurrency and minority communities. The fact sheet draws on existing research and public data to help inform how crypto is being marketed, adopted, and experienced in these communities, and to highlight where greater attention may be needed from policymakers and regulators. Let me start with a broader narrative. Cryptocurrency has been widely promoted as a tool for financial inclusion. It's often described as a way to reach the unbanked, bypass traditional financial institutions, and help underserved communities build generational wealth. That message has resonated with many. In fact, survey data suggests that Black Latino consumers are more likely than white consumers to report having used or invested in crypto. This reflects both the appeal of innovation and the persistence of economic barriers that make traditional financial services feel inaccessible or insufficient. But it's important to ground this trend in data. Nationally, crypto usage remains limited. In 2023, about 7% of US adults reported using crypto, a decline from 10% in 2022. And only 1% said that they had used crypto to make purchases. That means crypto is functioning far more as a speculative asset than as a form of everyday money. This distinction is important because speculative assets carry risks that may not be fully understood, especially when they're introduced as accessible wealth building tools. One of the most significant risks is volatility. Crypto prices have shown dramatic fluctuations, rising or falling by double digits in short timeframes. For investors with little to no financial cushion, this volatility can result in significant losses. That's particularly relevant when you consider the persistent racial wealth gap in the United States. The median white household has approximately 6 times the wealth of the median Black households and 5 times that of median Latino households. This means that financial losses, even in small amounts, can have a more profound impact on families that have already faced structural disadvantages in accessing and accumulating wealth. Another area of concern is fraud and scams. In 2023 alone, crypto-related fraud led to over $5.6 billion in consumer losses. But those losses increased significantly in 2024, surging to $9.3 billion, according to the complaint data compiled by the FBI. That represents a 66% increase year over year, with more than 140,000 complaints filed. Adults over the age 60 were particularly affected, both in volume and severity of losses. These include Ponzi schemes, fake investment platforms, phishing scams, and impersonation tactics, all often delivered through mobile apps or social media channels. These types of frauds can be especially effective in digital spaces where financial literacy may be limited and where crypto is being introduced as an unfamiliar but promising opportunity. Once funds are lost in crypto transactions, they are typically very difficult to recover, given the decentralized and unregulated nature of this sector. In addition, marketing practices deserve careful attention. Crypto products are often promoted through cultural channels that reach specific communities, including endorsements from celebrities and influencers. These campaigns often emphasize empowerment, freedom, and innovation, messages that understandably resonate with people who have long been excluded from traditional finance. But the substance of the product being promoted doesn't always align with those messages. A more concrete example involves Bitcoin ATMs. These machines are disproportionately located in low-income neighborhoods, many of which are predominantly Black or Latino. The vast majority of these ATMs only allow for the purchases of crypto with cash. They typically do not allow users to convert crypto back into cash. Fees for these transactions can exceed 20%. So for a user depositing $100, that can only mean receiving as little as $78 in value after fees before any change in the market price. In addition to high fees, Bitcoin ATMs have increasingly become a vector for fraud. These cases often involve bad actors impersonating government or tech support representatives and instructing victims to deposit money using crypto kiosks. Because these transactions are typically irreversible, losses are difficult to recover. In the first half of 2024 alone, over 65 million in consumer losses were tied to scams involving Bitcoin ATMs. These dynamics raise important questions about access, transparency, and fairness in financial services. They also point to a need for better data, clearer disclosures, and stronger oversight of the digital financial products and services that are increasingly reach underserved communities. And let me conclude with a few policy considerations. First, while cryptocurrency and related technologies may offer some long-term promises, the risks that they pose are real and immediate. These risks underscore the need for an effective framework that prioritizes financial safety alongside innovation. Second, the broader goal of financial inclusion should remain a top priority, but it must be pursued responsibly. Expanding access to regulated, transparent, and affordable financial services is essential. However, that access should not come through speculative or lightly regulated tools that serve as substitutes for systematic reform. And finally, regulators, consumer advocates, community leaders should continue to monitor how crypto is being used and marketed, with particular attention to equity, education, and enforceable consumer protections. Thank you again for the opportunity to speak. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dumas. Peter, do you want to ask your question? Peter Sherman?
Hi, yes, thank you. Well, I posted several, but I'll ask about this one, Mr. Dumas. Thank you for your presentation. Headlines say that the Trump administration is considering policies to increase federal investment in cryptocurrency or crypto assets. The Genius Act apparently is part of the big, beautiful spending package. Can you speak to which direction the government is headed and how you think it might change the conversation around crypto and its relative safety for users? Thank you.
This is a great question. So unfortunately, I cannot comment on any impending regulations due to the fact that my organization is a 501c3. However, I can speak to the past legislation, FIT 21, since it's not available. And I can tell you that the consumer protections of that bill is very similar to the Genius Act now. And I can tell you that it's lacking in the fact that a lot of people who promote these legislations are for pro-innovation. And one of the things to be pro-innovation is to light touch regulation. And because they feel that the more regulation you have, the less innovative the product can become. And they want crypto to be an innovative product, so therefore you have to be, light touch as far as the regulation is concerned. So one of the things I can say is that there's a lot of consumer protection that was in FIT 21. I'm not going to speak to the current legislation that was lacking because it left the agency, for example, to the Commodities Future Trading Commission, to come up with rules and regulations for consumer protection. And I can tell you that, a lot of these coins, Bitcoin, Ether, are the two main coins, are leaning to be regulated by the Commodities Future Trading Commission. And the CFTC is not a consumer protection regime. It's more of it's more of a market regulator and institutional investors protection, in the sense that most of their clients are most of the people who use the service of the CFTC are DCM, designated contract markets, or DCOs, designated derivative contract oversight. So basically what I'm saying is that the CFTC doesn't have, like the SEC, for example, consumer protection for investors. So it's going to be a long way for them to come up with certain market protections that rivals with the SEC. And because Congress doesn't have specific language in the FIT 21, which is similar to the Genius Act, I believe, it will leave it to a regulator that doesn't have the expertise to come up with certain consumer protection for the population.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Peter?
Peter? Oh, he probably got muted. All right. Okay, you probably did. I wanted to go to a quick question for you before we go to the following speaker. How can we rebuild trust in the traditional financial systems among marginalized communities, do you think?
That's a great question. So, not trying to get into politics, but, the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, CFPB, was on that path, right? Here was an agency who was going after fraudulent behavior, discrimination. They were going after the bad actors, if you will, right? And unfortunately, the Trump administration is trying to liquidate, trying to pretty much eliminate that agency to a shell of what it was, right? So had that continuation, I think the past director of the chairman of the agency, Rohit Chopra, he was doing an amazing job. He was definitely going after some of the other distrust that a lot of people felt. He was going after the payday loans, he was going after these check cashing places, he was going after people using overtly racial remarks about lending to people, and they were just coming down hand in hand, trying to at least start building trust among the community. They were doing a lot of educational platforms. They were doing a lot of things great for the American people, not just minority or vulnerable people, anyone who face any type of predatory lending, if you will, or anything predatory practices in the financial industry. But unfortunately, it's been reverted back to the shell of the company, or the shell of the agency that it is. But that was a great opportunity for building upon something that he was doing. And over the years, who knew 5, 10 years from now, you may have more of a trust in the financial system, knowing that you had an agency going after the bad actors who were doing some of the things that we discussed earlier.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Dumas. Please stay around. We move now to Elizabeth Kuo, who will talk about best practices for consumers, among other issues. Elizabeth, please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Happy Friday. As Pilar mentioned, I'm here to talk about just a brief overview of the types of uses in crypto that have become prevalent, as well as she mentioned, best practices for avoiding scams in the space. Some of the information has been touched upon by the two previous panelists, but I will share just a couple of tips and things like that. I've also dropped a couple of resources into the chat from the FTC, which is where I spent about 12 years up until the end of 2024. And they've got a lot of other great resources on their website as well that you could distribute to your viewers and other community members. So for starters, I think Tyrone laid out a really great foundation, and I appreciated the analogy to cash, because I think that is one of the most critical things to understand about engaging with any type of digital asset in the cryptocurrency space, whether you want to call it cryptocurrency or crypto asset. But specifically with digital coins such as Ether or Bitcoin, which is of course the most famous, you really do need to treat it as if you are dealing with cash, because once you hand it over to somebody else, it is effectively out of reach of anybody other than the person who received it. And so typically the only way you will get it back is with the assistance of the recipient. And other folks have also touched on this in the chat, but cryptocurrencies are typically not backed by any type of central authority. So that means no government backs them. There are examples of certain other countries that have tried to launch their own cryptocurrency, but by and large, cryptocurrencies, especially the popular ones like Bitcoin or Ether, are not backed by any central authority. So there is no one kind of watching for massive fluctuations or great losses, that sort of thing. And I'm sure many of you have seen the reportings when there have been, portions lost from exchanges or that sort of thing. And then, of course, the fluctuation is something that is also important to be aware of. So, for example, with Bitcoin, if you go back over the last 5 years, as of today, it is trading one Bitcoin to just about $105,000. If you were to go back to 5 years ago, it was a little bit under $20,000. And on any given day, that value will fluctuate hour to hour, sometimes by hundreds of dollars, sometimes by thousands, sometimes by tens of thousands. And so that fluctuation makes it very volatile for a consumer. And I think that Mr. Dumas had touched on this, which is many times folks are investing in a cryptocurrency as an asset and intend to use it almost like a, retirement account or an investment holding. And those fluctuations can be pretty severe for somebody who might be in a little bit more of a stressed financial posture, for example. Turning to best practices for avoiding scams, one of the main things to look out for, and let me back up and actually preface, many of the scams that are associated with cryptocurrencies are not novel. They're not new or unique to cryptocurrencies. They are scams that have been around for decades and decades. It's just that the new lure, the new hook is the digital asset or the cryptocurrency. And so what they're really trading on is the kind of quote unquote FOMO, fear of missing out, because, 10, 12 years ago, there were some folks that were able to invest largely in Bitcoin, for example, and now, they have tales of being extremely wealthy because they cashed out, or now they can show you, asset holdings that are, in the millions of dollars. But those people are the exception and not the rule. But scammers and fraudsters will kind of trade on that sense of you having missed out on your chance to get rich quick. And they'll, kind of even say it on their website. Oh, don't miss out again. Or, don't be the same person you were in 2015 when you could have done this and now you would be living on your own private island, all that sort of thing. And so one of the main things to look out for in scams, of course, is an out of the blue contact. So you get a text message that offers you an investment opportunity, or an email that says, that purports to be somebody with an opportunity to do something really quick and easy to, generate some extra income. The reverse type of a scam will, of course, be some sort of outreach that is a demand, whether it is blackmail or you've entered into some sort of agreement to do something, and then all of a sudden the person is only going to accept payment in cryptocurrency. Those are red flags, because anytime somebody is only willing to accept payment in cryptocurrency or is out of the blue asking you for a payment transfer, that should be a red flag to you. And then thirdly, of course, is the urgency, whether it is an investment opportunity or, somebody purporting to be a family member or, your son or daughter or your grandparent, kind of calls you up, and with the use of internet technology can sound convincingly like someone and they need money and they need it now, and they need you to either go online to an exchange or run over to a Bitcoin ATM that they can direct you to, but it has to be within the next hour and it's an emergency. That should be a red flag for you too, that this is A, coming out of the blue, but B, also must happen quickly and just with immediacy. And then lastly, I think some folks in the chat also mentioned this, but the idea that this technology is overly complicated and very technical, and that will be used to the scammer's advantage. Because if you start asking questions, well, how does this investment work? How do I get my money back? What do you do with the cryptocurrency? They can just say, oh, it's really technical. It involves a lot of coding. There's computers involved. They'll just throw a lot of technical jargon at you, all in an effort to make you feel that you are not in a position to ask questions, and also that the answers are irrelevant to your investment or, engagement with this person. And so again, that should be something that causes you to pause and really take stock of whether this is something that sounds too good to be true. And I will pause there.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Can you address the question that was asked earlier by Peter regarding the bill or whatever regulations that might be upcoming on crypto?
So I can touch on it lightly. Again, it is difficult to talk, and I see the note about talking slower. I apologize. Again, with bills that are proposed, especially in this current regulatory environment, it is a little bit difficult to predict because things seem to change by the day in some instances. But there is, of course, within this administration, a focus on kind of encouraging innovation in this space. I think some folks reference the fact that certain members of the White House have their own coins that they have put out on the market. Of course, we know that over at the SEC, which had a stance in the last administration regarding what cryptocurrencies should be classified as, have really scaled back their enforcement unit towards cryptocurrency enforcement work. And so I think that all of those signs would indicate that there is a loosening of the enforcement action in the cryptocurrency space. Now, whether that genius bill will go forward or what encouragement will actually look like is anybody's guess.
All right. Let's see. Who else asked a question here? Most of the questions have been answered. You guys are being so amazing. Okay, so I don't know, can you answer this? Henrietta, do you want to ask a question? You have several in the chat. Henrietta Burrows.
Thanks so much, Pilar. Most of my questions have been answered. Who sets the value of cryptocurrencies? And also, what effect do any of you think the rising use of cryptocurrencies will have on the value and the widespread use of traditional currencies?
So the value of cryptocurrencies is typically set by market demand. So as I mentioned, if you were to look at the value of Bitcoin, for example, if you look at it even over the last month, it has really gone up and down quite drastically, from 102,000 all the way, up to as high as 112. And currently today, it's just a little bit over 105,000. But that is all based on demand. So people buying and selling it, how many people want to buy it, really dictates that value. Over the last several years, as I said, it has gone down to, sub 20. If you go back even further than that, there was a time when it was trading in the, hundreds of dollars. And I believe the second part, what was the second part of your question?
What effect do you think the rising use of cryptocurrencies will have on the value and the widespread use of traditional currencies?
I think this was touched on a little bit by both of the prior speakers, but to date, really the primary use of cryptocurrencies has really been as an investment, a speculative investment vehicle. People who are purchasing, holding on to it, trying to make money when they sell it for more than they bought it. There is a burgeoning kind of niche areas where you can use it to actually transact. There are some large companies that had begun to accept cryptocurrency as a form of payment, and you've started to see the little icon for crypto wallets on certain merchant websites. I would still say, though, that by and large, many of those vendors are still, even if you pay someone, like you go to your local coffee shop and they accept Bitcoin, that vendor, coffee shop owner is still typically using a payment processor that immediately is turning that transaction back into a fiat currency, such as the US dollar. So I would really, it's still not becoming so prevalent that you're seeing kind of an adverse effect, because at the end of the day, you still need widespread acceptance. And so, for your everyday person who's going to the grocery store, or even somebody who is traveling abroad, there's not widespread enough acceptance to where you're going to be able to displace use of traditional currencies that are backed by governments. And I will say that that is also an area that you see a lot of reticence on, because as much as people want to be adopters and move forward towards kind of this potential future where there is less friction, consumers are also, especially in the Western countries, used to a very high level of consumer protection. People really assume that when you make a payment, if something goes wrong, somebody is there to help you. If you, accidentally sent 2 Bitcoin over to the wrong Elizabeth Kwok, there is this kind of feeling that, well, somebody should help me. That was a mistake, or that was a fraud, and that's not where I wanted my money to go. So who is going to help me? Or if there's a big crash in the value, when I was at the Federal Trade Commission, and the data still comes in on this, we get rafts of complaints of people who have had this experience and really feel like left kind of in the cold, because where is the party that's going to help us?
Elizabeth, thank you so much for all that great information and knowledge that you have on this. Please stay around. We're going to move on to the journalist in the group, a colleague who is also an expert and the author of a best-selling book, Number Go Up, Inside Crypto's Wild Rise and Staggering Fall. Mr. Fox will share on the very newsworthy subject that has been mentioned a couple of times about what President Trump and his family are doing with crypto. Seek.
Hi, everybody. Thanks
Hey.
for having me.
Oh, thank you.
So, President Trump, during his first term in office, was no fan of cryptocurrency. And he, in one interview, he called Bitcoin a scam against the dollar. And he said that cryptocurrency valuations were made up out of thin air. And that obviously changed. And what happened was actually the result of a concerted lobbying effort. So last year, a bunch of wealthy Bitcoin advocates got together. They were led by David Bailey, the chief executive officer of Bitcoin Magazine, which is they host a big, their biggest business is hosting this annual conference where tens of thousands of Bitcoin fans get together. And so Bailey and some other wealthy Bitcoiners decided that if they all got together and donated the maximum amount to Trump, maybe he could be more friendly to the industry. And it sounds kind of far-fetched, but they hosted a fundraiser in Nashville at last year's big Bitcoin conference, and they raised $20 million for the Trump campaign. And Trump flew into Nashville and he gave a speech to the Bitcoin conference in which he, instead of calling Bitcoin a scam, he basically repeated all of the industry's talking points. He said, if Bitcoin is going to the moon, as we say it's going to the moon, I want America to be the nation that leads the way. And so under the Biden administration, the Securities and Exchange Commission had filed a lot of lawsuits against the biggest Bitcoin or crypto companies. And what they said was essentially that much of the activity that was going on in crypto was violated US securities laws, like the laws that govern investing. And so this was like an existential threat to the industry. And some of the biggest companies in the industry, they also spent a lot on politics. They spent something like $150 million on mostly on congressional races. The crypto industry actually spent more last investment cycle than any other industry, like more than the oil and gas industry. And so so you can sort of split up the crypto guys into two camps, or more than two, but the Bitcoiners just love Bitcoin. They might even say the other ones are scams, and they just want the price of Bitcoin to go up. So they loved that Trump was endorsing Bitcoin. The crypto guys, they want everyone to be free to trade all kinds of cryptocurrencies. So what they wanted was new leadership at the Securities and Exchange Commission and much friendlier policies. And so Trump, in his speech, he vowed to do that too. And once he took office, he put into place a new head of the Securities and Exchange Commission, a guy who had previously worked as a crypto lobbyist. And the Trump administration dropped almost all of the lawsuits that had been filed against crypto companies. So the government's position went from most of this is probably illegal to everything is fine. Have fun trading your crypto. Now, interestingly, Trump, after he endorsed crypto in the speech, a few weeks later, he announced that he and his family were getting into the business themselves. And they now actually have more crypto ventures than anyone can keep track of. But the first one, which I think is the most important, was called World Liberty Financial. And what Trump said when he announced it was, we're embracing the future with crypto and leaving the slow and outdated big banks behind. That same sort of pitch that crypto is the future, it's going to help people, it's a new financial system. But with this World Liberty Financial, they still haven't quite explained exactly what it's going to do. But what they, you've got these vague, it's kind of typical for crypto. They have these vague promises about how great it's going to be. And then they say, hey, who wants to buy our coin? We have a new coin called WLFI. And the Trumps started selling this coin. And the way that it was designed was that if you bought the coin, it wasn't really clear what it did, but 3/4 of all the money you paid for these coins went to the Trumps. They ended up selling, so that there's not really any clear way that this coin could ever yield any profits for you. It doesn't represent like a state share in the company. Even if the company makes a lot of money, it wouldn't necessarily make the coin more valuable. But the Trumps were able to sell $550 million of this coin, which generated, that's $400 million in profits for them. Amazingly, one of the founders of the coin with Trump was Steve Witkoff, who is a real estate developer who was then also named, don't quote me on the title, but sort of our special envoy. Like he's the country's top diplomat these days. So his sons are now Donald Trump Sr. and Steve Witkoff have said they're no longer running this company. They've both put their sons in charge. So that's one of his ventures. Then just before practically on the eve of Trump's inauguration, he launched a meme coin. And a meme coin, like a lot of cryptocurrencies promise to do all sorts of different things. Like mostly some of them are different kinds of investments or alternative forms of ways of transacting. Meme coins are kind of this new kind of gambling game where the coin doesn't promise to do anything at all. It's just like the idea is that it's a little bit like this, like GameStop, if you followed that. It's like here's this new coin, who wants to buy it? And if you get in, or it's like musical chairs. If you get in early, maybe you can sell it at a higher price to someone who comes in later. But in the end, it's likely to crash. So Trump announced he was doing a meme coin. It immediately the price went way up due to all the excitement around it. Then a few days later, it crashed. And the best estimates are that the Trumps made something like $300 million in fees from that meme coin. And yeah, since then they've launched a few other crypto ventures. So it's a pretty big conflict of interest. The Trump administration is setting the rules for cryptocurrency, and these rules will affect all of these family businesses. So yeah, thank you. I think my 8 minutes are about up. So
Wow, it's very complicated, and I know you explained this whole thing in a podcast recently, and it took an hour, I think, to talk about this whole venture that Trump has. But I was just looking at a story that says real estate no longer makes up a majority of Donald Trump's fortune. So now crypto is the majority of his fortune. So that's an interesting thing. So Peter asked a question in the chat about the environmental impact of crypto. Do you want to talk about that, Zeke?
yeah, so this really only applies to Bitcoin. The way that the Bitcoin network is run involves these specialized computers called Bitcoin miners, and they basically race to solve like a mathematical puzzle. Basically they're competing to earn new Bitcoins, and as Bitcoin gets more valuable, it makes sense to use more and more computers to try to win one of those, $100,000 Bitcoins. So it's gotten to the point where there's special companies called Bitcoin mining companies that operate huge data centers with thousands of special computers, all mining Bitcoin. So the last estimate I saw was that all of this Bitcoin mining around the world used as much energy as a small country. I think someone said Argentina, but don't quote me on that. Other cryptocurrencies don't use this system mostly, and so they don't have the same problem with energy use.
Gotcha. Argentina is not that small.
Yes,
Maybe
true.
Uruguay or something. All right, Renee. Okay, let's just bring in everyone else, anyone that wants to answer questions. Renee, do you want to ask your question for anyone in the panel? Maybe Tyrone? Renee Barbie? She's okay. I don't know if she's being allowed to unmute, so I'm going to read it for her. Why is crypto so popular? I don't understand why so many people are trying to get rich off of cryptocurrency. Who wants to ask that? Tyrone, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I have a lot to say actually about everything that was said in the last 20 to 30 minutes.
Yes,
I've been in the space 13 years, so I have fairly thick skin, and I've heard all of the tired, regurgitated reasons why it's not this or that. That's the only thing worse than all of the coins and scammers in the space, by the way, is the tired, regurgitated, it's not this, it's not that. But I digress. So I have fairly thick skin on that, and I respect the other side of that. Where I think it's a little dangerous, though, is if you aren't actively looking into the reasons why you say it's nefarious, then it's a problem, right? If you actually haven't opened a Coinbase account, if you actually haven't tried moving money with crypto, if you haven't really tried the technology or the ease of use, to me, it's hard to sit there and waggle your finger a little bit. The other thing is, and I'm gonna be completely honest here, as a Black American, right, in this country, and looking at folks that have a prominent voice like a Melody Hobson, right? Like a John Hope Bryant, to sit there and speak against what this means for folks like myself that have been advocating for people, Black people, right? I've stopped using people of color since this current administration, since we, need to make some distinctions there now. So I will say Black Americans, and I'm gonna speak for my folks. I think it's very dangerous when people who have a prominent voice try to demean our people by, it's almost like we aren't smart enough to understand a speculative asset versus investment or whatever else. It's very demeaning. And I think that's the difference to me between financial literacy and financial education. When you say financial literacy, it's almost like you're looking down on people. But when you say financial education, it's just very erudite, well-to-do people who can accept education. I've been all over this country speaking to people on financial education, and the poorest areas, rural. I was just in Birmingham, Alabama, and speaking about crypto. So my point on that is the reason it is so popular, yes, is because there are bad actors, just like there is in every other piece of technology, bureaucracy, government, and everyone else. Anything good will be co-opted for evil. That's happened since the beginning of time. Eve bit the apple, right? And hey, it's just what it is, right? So that's always been there. But I think for anyone that is advocating for underserved communities to speak about this in a demeaning way is counterproductive to me. And I think because it's one thing to, even if you feel as though it's scammy or whatever, then give facts and keep people out of it with facts. But for those that are in, educate them and give them a way to do this. And while we're sitting here, this is very important. as we're sitting here, Walmart, it was just announced that Walmart is going to launch a stablecoin. Again, I'm not here to convince adults whether this is a good or bad thing. We're all adults. We're entrenched in our ways, right? You talk to people's emotion, not their reason, right? And if people are very emotional about things, you're not going to get them to change. But here's the thing. Walmart has tried becoming a bank 3 times. 90% of people in this country live within 10 minutes of a Walmart. Remember what I was saying earlier about banking deserts? 68% of the people who shop at Walmart make $25,000 or less. Why does Walmart run a fintech called One, which provides basic banking services? Because the traditional system has stopped Walmart from becoming a bank. So if they do nothing else that uses a crypto rail, a stablecoin, to make it easier for people to transact, save their money, how could you advocate for underserved people and be against that? How? When the existing system is telling them that we don't want you to do this to help the very people that are shopping in your store. Anyway, I'm off my soapbox, but I think I'm fine with the other side. But I think the only thing worse, and to me, it is the worst thing, is the tired, regurgitated excuses as to why yes, of course there's bad here. Of course there is. But educate people to that, but explain to them how this could be helpful in their everyday lives and what it means. Eventually it will get to you. And I don't mean investing. I don't mean holding it. I mean simply understanding that, hey, if Bitcoin being introduced to the world, by the way, without Bitcoin, we don't have a stable coin. Without Bitcoin, we don't get that announcement that Walmart just made. We don't get Visa stock down 6% on that news. Amazon too, by the way, and Bank of America yesterday talking about a stable coin and everything else. If this is no use, why would the largest companies in the world do it? But anyway, I'm done.
Thank you, Tyrone. No, I hear you. We're running out of time.
It's infuriating. But anyway,
we're running out of time, and so I want. Did anyone else have something to say about what he just said? Chinita, you want to say something?
I actually wanted to ask Zeke a question about foreign investment in Bitcoin and in Trump's Bitcoin company, and whether, what are your concerns about that leading to access to the president via his, the Trump family's Bitcoin company?
So yeah, Peter in the chat gave a good example. With this World Liberty coin, the biggest buyer was a crypto guy named Justin Sun.
Right.
He bought $75 million of World Liberty coins. That means I think it's 46 million in fees to the Trumps. And at the time, he was facing a fraud lawsuit from the SEC. Now, after he made the investment, the lawsuit was put on hold and they're in settlement talks. So we do not know that he got any special favors. In fact, a lot of people had their lawsuits dropped, but it certainly, if someone wants special favors, there's now a really good way to give the president's family money. And I certainly am, going to look into, I'm trying to look into whether anything untoward has happened. But it's like in the first Trump administration, there was a lot of concern that people would try to curry favor with him by renting rooms at his hotel, which is like a few $100,
right?
Maybe like $1 million if you throw a wedding. Now you can buy like an unlimited amount of the coins, and you can get even people from other countries who'd be barred from donating to the campaign can buy the cryptocurrencies. So it's definitely raises some concerning possibilities.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. We have run out of time, but I wanted to go around the room and just give at least the 2 other guests who haven't spoken in a little bit a chance to say a final word. Maybe Cantrell, Dumas, do you want to say something? Just 1 minute.
1 minute, yeah. So, just to piggyback what Tyrone said. So I'm actually from Birmingham, Alabama, born and raised. And, I do understand the concerns that, people have with this financial system. I grew up in an area where, my grandparents didn't have a bank, right? They kept their money in a mattress. So I know firsthand what it means to be unbanked, just from my family alone. But the idea is that I think that a lot of times the messaging, can be predatory in that it's trying to get people to join in on something that they don't really have the education of what they're joining. And my whole point is that, there may be promise. I'm not, Nostradamus. I don't know what the future may hold. It may be the greatest thing since sliced bread. I just want people to be educated on what they're doing, right? Instead of thinking that, a lot of people, I have friends who think that they can just deposit money and invest in a certain crypto, and within 5 years they have it made. And that's not how it works, There's a lot of things that goes into that, and I just think people need to be more educated about that situation, and understand that a lot of marketing that comes to them, and just be aware of that marketing and what the motivation may be. And that's all.
Thank you, Control. Thank you. Elizabeth, you want to say final words?
Yeah, I will just echo that. I think the thrust here is just to be educated and ask questions. Don't act under time pressure, because that's kind of the opposite point of a financial or like a stable financial system. And I think it's always smart to seek out advice from, verified sources. As I said before, the scams that are capitalizing on the crypto craze, as some people call it, are bread and butter scams that have existed, since the beginning of commerce. So I don't think there's new things happening there. It's just a different hook. But we would, again, just urge people to slow down and do their due diligence before they partake.
All right. Well, thank you so much. We are 2 minutes over the hour, so we're going to say goodbye. Thank you to everyone. I know all of you are really busy people, and to have taken this hour to educate us on this, we really thank you. And have a nice weekend.